Thank you very much. So a very warm welcome to our session here. We're a team of researchers from Germany, and we will talk to you about the My Basic Income raffle that has been going on for 8 years, and also our new project, the first German scientific research project on the universal basic income that has been running for 1 year now. I'm Michael Bohmeyer. I'm the initiator of the organization behind this project. And with me are 3 researchers who we will introduce later. And let me get started with a quick kickoff and show you some information about the future of this the past and the present of this future. We've been coming a long way. 8 years ago is the time when we started Mein Grundeinkommen, which means my basic income in German. It was a very simple idea. It was the idea to prototype UBI by starting a crowdfunding campaign. And whenever we collect 12,000 euros, we would just give it to randomly selected people for 1 year at 1,000 euros a month, free of conditions, just like a real UBI. We've been doing this for many times now, and over 1,200 people have received an UBI so far, and each month 25 new people join this lucky group. So in total, we've almost redistributed 20 million euros. We have a user base of 3.6 million users, and all this is possible by our lovely donors who almost donate 1 million euros each month. It's very simple. It's free of charge. Everyone can join, everyone from all around the world. All you need is an email address. Even babies can join through their parents. So it's really, really simple approach. Just a side note, we are almost 40 full-time employees working in Berlin in a very radical new work approach, but that's a different story. Our crowdfunding and lottery campaign has been very successful. We have about 7 media publications each day. It is so successful because for the first time we have faces and stories and feelings that everyone can relate to. UBI no longer is an abstract thing that you write political essays about, but it's a relatable everyday story. And this made our campaigns so successful. We wrote a best-selling book. I attended the most important political TV show, and we helped the UBI to enter the debate within the last years. Ever since we launched, the average appearance of UBI on German media has doubled sustainably. So that's a pretty cool thing. Now, the first question, obviously, that's coming up is, how did these kind of UBIs, the 1,000 euros for 1 year to randomly selected people, change the people's lives? And this is what Julia Malinka is going to talk about. She's the first of the 3 researchers I brought with me, and I would like to give her the word now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael, for these kind words and introduction. I welcome you to my presentation on work motivation and health-related outcomes in the context of universal basic income. My name is Julia Malinka, and I'm holding a diploma degree in psychology. In the next few minutes, I will show some of the first findings of this collaboration between Mein Grundeinkommen e.V., Ernst-Abbe University of Applied Science, and Humboldt University of Berlin. And my work is funded by Ernst-Abbe University of Applied Science, Jena. My scientific mentors are Christine Mitte and Matthias Ziegler. Now I want to give you a short summary about the research questions of my PhD thesis. The state of the evidence concerning empirical findings is that there are few studies with a quasi-experimental study design. Little is reported of psychological outcomes, and almost nothing is yet known about trajectories of life satisfaction, well-being, or work motivation in employed people. That's what we did. My research is based on the theoretical framework of self-determination theory, quite a famous theory in psychology. Very generally, it posits that basic psychological needs at work influences work motivation, and in turn influences health-related outcomes such as well-being and life satisfaction. Given universal basic income, the relations might change. Furthermore, we control for structural factors, which we regard as covariates. We assumed that life satisfaction and well-being increase with UBI payment, and independence of qualities of motivation, especially autonomous motivation. We expected that health-related outcomes are dependent of autonomous motivation in a positive relation. And we also assume the connection between work-related need satisfaction and health-related outcomes should be moderated by self-determined qualities of work motivation. We also checked for effects of demographics such as age, gender, education, income, working hours per week, and we assumed, in line with universal basic income, that there are no additional effects on those health-related outcomes. Another covariate was work pandemic influences we just looked at. So we picked our sample from voluntary online registered people at Mein Grundeinkommen e.V., who were potential participants at this crowdfunding platform. Every month, around about 20 people were randomly selected from the pool of these registered persons, and they got a monthly payment of €1,000 for 1 year each person who won. Then we invited adult winners to take part at the survey, and we collected our data from October 2019 to March 22. So people got a chance to participate at 3 times. This was before payment, during month 6 and during month 12. So we had 3 waves we now look at. And this is kind of another graph to show how it worked. So we had a staggered payment with different cohorts of winners, and they have all 3 points in time. We also did a post survey after UBI finished, but this is not theme in my presentation now. We used validated scales for assessment of the dependent and independent parameters. Reported reliabilities on this slide are the minimum alpha values of the different time points on the scale. We used need satisfaction at work scale, motivation at work scale, for assessing the 2 constructs of work motivation and need satisfaction. I want to briefly explain the subscales of work motivation because they are distinct from the general distinction of work motivation. Dickey and Ryan had the idea to differ between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. A lot of you would be familiar with these terms. We decided to follow Günther in distinguishing between autonomous and in this way more self-determined motivation versus controlled motivation. Life satisfaction is actually shown to be quite well captured by a single item, what we did. And we also had WHO 5 Well-Being Index in our surveys. As covariates, we pick typically age, gender, education, income, working hours per week. Age and working hours were continual variables and mean-centered. The others are categorical. In the case of income, it was specifically indicated that wave 2 and 3 refer to income without basic income. Our response rate is quite good. It lies between 74% and 55%, and we have a total sample size of 404 people. But we just had a look at employed people, so we had a subsample, and this subsample we used for calculation. This consisted of 274 persons. Participants are on average approximately 40 years old when they enter the study. Range in age, as you can see, is wide. Women are somewhat in the majority at all the times. Other demographics show normal distributions. And this graph finally shows the average trajectory of our first outcome, life satisfaction. The scaling of life satisfaction reached from 0, not at all satisfied, to 10, absolutely satisfied. And mean scores vary between 6 and 7. And as you can see, there is growth indicated in life satisfaction. The same pattern occurs for well-being over the time. So again, we have a growth from T1, meaning there is no universal basic income, to T2, what is wave 2 and is in month 6 of the payment, and it stays at the same higher level at wave 3 at the end of payment. And the scores in this case vary between 3 and 4 on a scale reaching from 1, not at any time, to 6 all the time. So what we did then, we applied structural equation modeling. It's quite a common method in psychology, and more specifically, we applied latent growth curve analysis. We were using the package Lavan and R with the procedure FIML for the missing data pattern. Our model specification was that we have 2 different outcomes, and for each of these outcomes, we created a baseline model with fixed loadings on the intercept part and the slope part. To show this, just for you as audience, to make it more visibly clear how model looked like, as I assume not all of you might be familiar with the methods, I show you and explain a simplified graph of the model. So here you can see there are the dependent variables at 3 different points in time. There is an intercept part that is an estimate of the initial level of, in this case, life satisfaction. And there is a slope part that is an estimate of the growth in life satisfaction. This is the basic model. And then we have at the upper end in this graph the different predictors, we say. So there are gender, age, education, income, working hours as structural predictors and covariates, and the pandemic indicator as well. And there are also work-related predictors like motivation and need satisfaction. So what we did then, we first tested for modal fit. So we set up these models and looked if these models fit the data. All models showed good model fit, none had to be rejected. So what I am telling next are the results of the unstandardized estimates in the model and their standard errors. What is marked here with these little stars are significances in our results. The results of the baseline model indicate that the initial level of life satisfaction varies between people and that overall growth of life satisfaction exists. You can see this in the slope variance, slope mean part. Slope variance part is not significant, so it indicates that there is no inter-individual difference in growth. Moreover, it is indicated there are predictors which might explain where this growth in general comes from. So then we tested for the predictors. In our case, motivation, need satisfaction, and their interaction. Autonomous motivation at first measurement and need satisfaction, need for autonomy can separately explain initial levels of life satisfaction, but they cannot explain the value in slope mean. A moderation analysis was run in the moderation model to determine whether the interaction between needs and motivation at wave 1 significantly predicts growth in the outcome intercept and slope. But in fact, this was not the case. So what we have here is the variables satisfaction of need autonomy and autonomous motivation are quite different in their content, but they seem to share the same variance in the dependent variable life satisfaction. The same pattern occurs for the outcome well-being. As a short summary of these models, both needs and autonomous motivation can explain initial levels, but none of these observed variables can explain growth in life satisfaction and well-being. So this is our first result of the first models. And second, we calculated models with the covariates, income, and a positive change of attitudes towards the job due to pandemic crisis. This is our pandemic indicator, are predictors of initial level and life satisfaction. And income can additionally explain effects in growth. This means the higher the income at the start of the study, the higher the level of life satisfaction, but also the lower the rate in growth. Interestingly, we did find some effect of the pandemic crisis in the initial level of life satisfaction. For well-being, predictors of initial level are gender, indicating that women are lower in well-being at the start of study. Again, income influences the slope part significantly. In contrast to life satisfaction, there is no effect of the pandemic indicator at all. So, as you can see, that some of our assumptions from the very beginning are confirmed. Some had to be rejected or partly rejected. I will come to this later on in my conclusion. Obviously, there is a lot of potential within the panel data. At some points, we got just a small glimpse on growth in life satisfaction and well-being, as well as the underlying mechanisms. And just because of interest, we further calculated models where we included autonomous motivation as time-varying variable that can develop as well, just by calculating the difference between waves. This is what you can see in this graph. Autonomous motivation and the difference between autonomous motivation seen as AM parameter. So anticipated that the sample size is not large enough. It was just 69 persons we could include in order to make conclusive statements. There is evidence that development in autonomous motivation might become the strongest predictor for growth. the strong influence of income decreases. As you can see on the line, it's minus 0.47. Before it was 0.8 somewhat. So it's not the strongest predictor anymore, while it is still important. And the same pattern, what a surprise, occurs for the outcome well-being. This would mean if people get the chance to enhance their autonomous motivation at work, so that they can work self-determined and develop qualities of motivation that are of higher character, and their need satisfaction as well, they have great potential in growth on health-related outcomes such as life satisfaction and well-being. To conclude, so what is the learning in universal basic income so far from our calculations? We observe that there is an overall growth in life satisfaction and well-being during payment. This finding is impressive, considering that the pandemic crisis was ongoing during this time, where we know from other work that well-being and life satisfaction was decreasing during this period. It cannot be increased indefinitely, but reaches a plateau. Autonomous motivation and satisfaction of the need for autonomy at the beginning of the study were able to explain parts of the variance in initial levels in the outcome. Furthermore, development of autonomous motivation and need satisfaction are candidates to explain growth in health-related outcomes. So they should be included in long-term pilot studies. Income proves to be a strong predictor for growth in health-related outcomes. As people with lower income increase in life satisfaction and well-being, this strengthens the evidence that income cannot arbitrarily increase life satisfaction, and that additional income will help people, especially in lower income classes. What we therefore can confirm is the necessity of financial security for health-related outcomes. So our study is, of course, with some limitations. First is the sample size, of course. Bigger samples can include calculations with more variables, more parameters, and so on. So we were kind of limited here. Another point is that it is always good to have a control group. What we did now is to look at a trajectory of life satisfaction and well-being. So we did a pre-post design, what is quite good to answer our questions, but control group is very desirable. And another point is that the understanding of universal basic income may be covered with the payment of €1,000 per year, yes, but it is not a state income. We had often the discussion on this conference if we have a state income versus a community-based income could be a difference in how people behave. As well, we have here voluntary registrations. In that way, it might be seen as condition because people decide for it, they are interested in it, and they are they have kind of knowledge about universal basic income. And we are here looking at an employed sample, so people are in a way, in a working process, and this limits also the conclusions for representation. So I thank you very much for your attention and hope there are questions or acknowledgements. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. If you have any questions during our talks, please don't hesitate to write them in the chat box, and we will try to answer them as soon as possible or at the end of the talk. What you've seen now is Julia, who has been doing research on the raffle that I told you about. And this was very promising to us. I tried to translate all this difficult scientific wording into what I received from the winners in the past years. When talking to them, they almost all of them said, I sleep better. They felt empowerment effects. They said they would be more social, and like in many other UBI studies, we didn't find any large effects on the working offered, so people did not become lazy. What was really interesting to us is that everyone can participate in our raffle, and also people from the middle class who already had enough money, who already should have had enough income security, were also experiences many of these effects. Julia already said that the impact on well-being is bigger when you have a lower income, but still we had some impact on the people with a higher income, and we thought this was very interesting. Well, after hearing these stories over 1,000 times, over and over again for years, we were on the one hand very motivated, and on the other hand a little bit critical, because we were scared that we had some self-selection bias here, or an interviewee effect, because when we're asking people to give answers, maybe they would give answers that they would think we would like. So, but at the same time, I said we were very motivated. So if we really had positive individual effects of the UBI, we were wondering how would this affect society if everyone had a UBI like this? And we were writing down some questions. So the first is the health effect. If people did really have less stress with the UBI, as they told us, and maybe this would be a positive thing. Maybe we could get people out of the stress loop and give them more self-efficacy, maybe more locus of control. Maybe they would have more resources to take better decisions. This was as our primary question. Then, what would this mean for the digital revolution when many jobs are changing in the next decades? How are people perceiving these changes with income security in their backhand? Well, obviously, the question in UBI is how does it change work and your attitude towards work? Will there be less exploitation because people can now choose jobs that they really like? What happens to societal cohesion? Will the ego attitudes that are being promoted currently maybe change into more eco perspectives, as winners in the past have reported us? This might also even have an effect on democracy. People that have more time and that are less scared of losing things might actually be able to participate better in current debates. And of course, the biggest crisis of all that we're facing, the climate catastrophe. And we have heard some stories of our winners saying that they developed a more post-materialistic attitude, that even though they did have more money now, they didn't spend much more, or they spent more time thinking about what they really need. And we know that stress level correlates with your environmental behavior. And since people are less stressed with the UBI, maybe this would even be a good starting point for the necessary behavioral changes that we need in order to survive this climate catastrophe. So all these very big questions we really need an answer. And that's why we started our next big project 2 years ago. And this is our first scientific pilot project. And this is a very short introduction video that I want to show you.
Wow, a whole lot going on. Faster and faster, more and more. And what about us? Right in the middle. Stress and burnout have become part of our everyday life, but is there no alternative? Can we succeed in ensuring that digitalization not only has a heart for progress, but also for us humans? And wouldn't it be great if everyone who does a good job would get more than just praise? Our society is becoming increasingly divided, but what can we do against this new division of Germany? Does the far right become more and more extreme? Do we have anything to counteract populism? And is there perhaps a remedy for overconsumption? Or is this just going to be trash? In search of new big ideas on how to break the stress cycle and meet the challenges of our time, more and more people believe in an unconditional basic income. But believing alone is not enough. We want to know. This is why the German Institute for Economic Research and the non-profit Mein Grundeinkommen are launching the first German pilot project, financed by over 140,000 people, like you and me, people who want to know. You want to know too? Then why don't you just join in? Find out more about the pilot project and become part of the study. basicincomepilot.org.
Yep. That was back in 2020. And for us, this was a big journey because, we made this movement here from trying to studying. And obviously, as said before, we cannot ask the questions ourselves, and we shouldn't be doing this. So we had to find scientific partners. And this is the partners you can see here, some of whom you will get to know in a second. And we asked them to double check everything that we found out in the past years to start a 3-year-long study financed by our donors. And as we want to know, as we want to try to find answers to the big questions I asked earlier. And so we went ahead and started to plan a randomized controlled trial with more than 1,500 participants, of whom 122 are now receiving 1,200 euros per month. And that is just like in our raffle before, money that the participants get on top to their existing incomes. Unlike in our past researches that Julia has been talked about, we have now a control group, and the period is not only 1 year but 3 years. It is, as said before, the first pilot in Germany, and as far as I can tell, it is also the first ever pilot program who's not focusing on poor people, but focusing on people in the middle class. We think that there has been enough proof on UBI trials with people living in poverty, and we have seen large effects on these people. But the middle class is a very, very large group in Germany, and since we want to introduce the UBI for everyone in society, we were thinking, okay, then let's start with the biggest group. And this is also a political and strategic reason, because if you don't convince the middle class in Germany, there's no chance to ever introduce a UBI. So we were also choosing the middle class to focus and to find out what are the benefits of the people who would in the end vote for it. And then the big day came up. In 2022, we started the screening where all people of Germany could apply to be part of the study. And we had 16 million of the 83 million people in Germany who actually went to our website that day. And 2.1 million of them signed up to be part of the study. So we had a fantastic data set to choose the 122 people from. And then a little more than a year ago, in June of 21, the research finally started. And what that exactly looks like is you will hear now by my colleague Susann Fiedler. Are you ready?
Yeah. I am ready. Thank you so much for the introduction, Michael, and the fantastic work that you have done so far already with the NGO. I came on board to this pilot project as a psychologist by joining a group of economists, sociologists, working already quite some time on the question how to really efficiently investigate scientifically the effect of a unconditional cash transfer that people are receiving on a monthly basis over the course of 3 years? Yeah, and the answer is a clear randomized control trial. Yeah, we heard already from Julia what she has discovered within collecting the data over the period of receiving the basic income from the beginning to the middle to the end. Yeah, but now we wanted to go the step further, and we seek to contribute the investigation of this unconditional basic income by the means of an RCT. Now, the study allowed us to provide, or should provide us, the opportunity to provide causal evidence for or how the temporary receipt of substantial cash income will affect individuals' change on multiple levels of their perceptions as well as their behaviors. I'm, as a psychologist, are particularly interested in the aspects of well-being and decision-making competence over the course of this experiment, but we have focused obviously on other more standard decision-making or behavioral measures, as we have seen in other experiments. We are by far not the first people working on this, obviously. There have been RCTs, as Micah has already talked about, in low-income countries mostly. There have been a few things in the US already where we see a min-income. All of these different kind of projects that we are listing here based on the criteria that they are sharing with our project, are definitely the basis of why we are investigating this and why this is interesting for us. But they lacked some of the aspects that we thought are crucial for investigating a basic income. Because we wanted it to be unconditional. Now, that is, I think, the first step, which it often isn't, because it is based on some kind of a subgroup of population, especially now in the crisis relief programs. They are very much targeted towards specific groups. And as Michael pointed out, we are really interested in what would the introduction of a basic income do also to the middle of the society. Because these are the people who will be the ones voting for it, bringing it potentially through the political reins. So what we did is design the 3-year-long study, with the help of Mein Grundeinkommen, collected a lot of donations of individual small-scale donors that are supporting this research, very substantially. And we now have the chance to observe the individuals for over 3 years. I already have one bad news. I will not present any results today because we are right in the middle of collecting data. We are in year 1 of data collection, and right now we are keeping everything sealed in order to not give our participants the chance to already know what we do think we find, what our hypotheses are, and so on. But I will talk a little bit about how the experiment is set up, and I'm very happy if you have any questions concerning that. So let's have a look. How did the whole thing go about? We know from past experiments, as the ones that you saw on the previous slides, main outcomes often are, health goes up, mental health as well as physical health. We see often an increase in education, well-being. But one of the main things that often will be or receives most media attention is the fact, or the assumption mostly said, that people are assuming that participants or receivers of a basic income will stop to go and provide their labor or reduce it to a substantial amount. We don't find much evidence for that yet. If you remember the talk of the Finnish colleague yesterday, where they also do not find an effect of a reduction of work in their experiments, as well as in many other of these experiments where there's no evidence for it. But given that this is one of the biggest political arguments against it, because the big fear always is like, how can we finance it, assuming everybody will not be doing any kind of work anymore? Now we are definitely will have a look at this as well. So how did the whole thing go about? Michael already told you about that we called for applications during a press conference in August 2020. Yeah? And in a matter of minutes, thousands of potential participants apply. The raffle was open until November then, and at this point we received over 2 million applications. So indeed, that was a really nice population or sample that we can now draw randomly from the participants of our unconditional basic income. We did have a little bit of a funnel, yeah, because given that we are providing only, and I say only with quotation marks here, 122 people with a basic income, we also have to think about the heterogeneity of this group. Yeah, because if we are now comparing lots of different population characteristics, let's say the mom with 5 kids who is stay at home versus the working husband of a no child household, we will find substantial differences between those two to begin with, but might not actually have a chance to observe the differences that a conditional basic income would essentially provide. So what we did is we provided a pre-selection based on some demographic criteria to make this group more homogeneous and focus on the people in the middle of the society that we are particularly interested in within this project. So everybody in the raffle had to be over 18 years old, and they had to have a place of residency in Germany at this point. Then moving on, we did this pre-selection and only captured people who were between 21 and 40 years old. They only lived as singles in their households. They had no dependent children. They were participants are German residents, and they are not receiving any long-term unemployment payment at this point. And their monthly income should lie between 1,100 and 2,600 euros. No? This is where we are starting. This is our target group for the experiment. That left us with quite a lot of people still. No? Meaning we had a pre-selection here of 20,000 people that are now invited for a basic income survey. So this basic survey has been filled out for everyone before the lottery will be taking place at this point. Within this pre-selection, this basic questionnaire that our subject had to fill out, we had their employment status, their length of their service, satisfaction with current employment, many variables that might be informative for our understanding of who they are, while they are not receiving anything yet, while they are not informed about if they are a winner of a basic income or not. Yeah, so we have a nice baseline measure before the whole experiment even started. This all, is just to give you a little bit of a timeline, started in 2020, and then in the beginning of 2021, we are doing the whole pre-selection process and lottery stuff. And then we are letting them do the baseline and hair sample, actually. One thing that we are particularly interested in is the perception, but also the experience of stress. And it is really nice to ask people about their experiences because they are indeed good in answering these kind of questions. But as Michael has pointed out, we want to be very cautious and not fall into the trap of people, let's say, answering in a way that will please us. But we really want to see also the more objective part of, for example, a stress measure here that will be the measurement of using hair samples in order to identify hormones that are related to stress and can be measured over months. So we did this basic hair sample here to have a baseline measure here as well for a subsample of people. People taking part would receive an additional of 50 euros for their trouble that they had to go through to actually cut their hair and send it in for the laboratory. Then they were informed if they are part of the winner group or the control group. Yeah, Michael already pointed out we have over 1,500 people in the whole experiment, and 122 of those are receiving basic income, meaning this basic income will be transferred to their account monthly, and the control group, who is in all of the aspects that we thought are relevant for our research, are identical to this treatment group. No? So we have tons of people who are at the point of the baseline questionnaire identical in comparison to the treatment group, and so we should be able to track their changes and the differences towards the treatment group in a very effective way. And then in wave 1, yeah, that's approximately 6 months after they first were informed that they are winning, we are now collecting the first wave of data. Now, meaning many of the measures will be repeated. The same will happen 6 months after that in wave 2. That is the moment where we are at right now, and we are currently preparing wave 3. What our study will not be able to answer is if UBI has an effect on everyone. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty clear given that we are restricting our sample to the middle of the society at this point. Then which macro effects an UBI triggers, meaning like how a labor market will develop, not focus of this project. We are focusing on the individual decision maker, the individual human being, and what does this do with their or her or their different perception. We also don't know how people would react to the introduction of a tax-financed UBI, given that this is such a special case where other people are donating their money in order to provide this basic income for you. This is essentially the same kind of mechanism as a tax, just it's framed a little bit different. But it would be interesting how this framing might have an effect. We also don't know what people would do if they would receive it forever. Yeah, 3 years is something that we have discussed a lot. From a psychological perspective, we know that the time horizon in that age group is between 2 to 5 years. Yeah, you don't plan much longer than that. Most people actually only plan for the year, and then everything is open for grabs. But 3 years was a solid offer that we can now provide, so that planning horizon is there. And then we also don't know how UBI will affect the community, yeah? But we can find answers to the individual decisions and the individual perceptions. Yeah, this is why we are collecting demographics, that's for sure. Yeah, we have still some sample heterogeneity. That is something that we have to be taken care of. We are tracking their income and their living conditions. If anything changes, they will report that. We are focusing very strongly on well-being, on meeting their subjective, but also their health perception, as well as the hair samples, as we just discussed. Yeah, we are also wanting to know how they use their time. Is there any change in how they distribute their attention during their workday, during their weeks? How do their perceptions of work and also the autonomy that they're experiencing in their day-to-day life is changing over the course of the experiment? We collected upfront as well as during the waves now attitudes that are focused on economic preferences. We also, are you pro-social? In which way do you like reciprocity? Do you think, how do you define fairness? Focusing on perceptions that are crucial for making decisions on a day-to-day basis when it is about cooperation. Yeah, for example, do you help a colleague? Are you in the context of your firm? In which way are you helping out? Are you integrated? Are you focusing on climate change and making your contributions here? So we have this model in which we are trying to capture how attitudes are changing, but as well as preferences, maybe also in the context of political preferences, yeah, by tracking their voting preferences and initiations. We have now an additional module on decision-making and decision-making biases that we are providing them within an interactive game setting that they get sent to and can easily be answered via on the phone. And another big chunk of our research will be on the perception and the perceived autonomy of individuals, meaning also the perceived self-efficacy. Because here we would expect that people who are more in charge of their financial resources, who have more than they actually, so that they are not constantly in distress, that they are perceiving more autonomy about the life choices that they are making. One last module that we are curious about is consumption. How are consumption patterns changing? And we are in the process of collecting that. So now you have a little bit of an overview what we are doing. That is certainly not everything that can be done, but it is a first step to understand how an additional cash inflow, a security of resources, can influence individuals. And that is what we are curious about within this pilot project here in collaboration with Mein Grundeinkommen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susann, for this presentation of what we are working on right now. And now we're going one step further because, as Susann mentioned, we're gonna have the first preliminary results in August of next year, and then the final results of the study in 2024. But whatever we're finding out in this study that we cannot tell yet is only half of the truth of the UBI. And this is the money on top myth. In all of the projects we've been doing so far, we gave people an extra cash. But of course, if you want to test a full UBI model where that is actually feasible for the state to be introduced, you would have to not only test the cash transfer, but also the raised taxes that are necessary in order to finance the cash transfer for everyone. So this is what we're looking at right now. We want to not only test the cash transfer, but also the necessary taxation. We think that this is a very, very important step in the debate on UBI, because the first question is, will the effects that we discovered now, the well-being, will they remain when people not necessarily get more money in the end of the month, but a guarantee that they will never drop below a certain amount? And how much more money do they maybe need in order to still have the effects? Where's the sweet point between costs and effect on the individual? We think that this is maybe the most important question when thinking about the feasibility of a real UBI. And this is the question that we want to set up our next research project for. And how this can be done, and how this can not only be done in our case, but maybe in every state or private pilot project in the next years in a very modern way, is presented to you by Kasy, the next researcher of our group that I would like to give the word to now.
Hi everyone, thanks Micha for the introduction and the transition, and thanks everybody who made these projects possible, and also thanks to the audience who stick around at the end of this long conference. So what I want to talk about today is the question of why do we even do basic income experiments, and then I'm going to give one possible answer to that question. And based on that answer, I'm going to discuss what this implies for how we should design and analyze these experiments. And so in order to get there, I'm going to start by playing a bit of devil's advocate here, right? I guess many of you who are here are obviously interested in basic income and in pilots and trials of basic income programs. Question is, why are we doing this? And so there's an Austrian saying, which roughly translates as, I'd rather be rich and healthy than poor and sick. The point, of course, being that, of course, that's what you want. And so translating that to the context of basic income, arguably the finding that giving money to people mostly makes them better off is not too surprising, right? So what do we find out from experiments where we give money to people and they end up being better off along various dimensions? And right, so kind of driving home this point, what is a basic income? Kind of building on what Micha was just saying. At the end of the day, basic income is a form of redistribution, right? It's not more money for everyone, right? It's not coming out of nowhere. It's some form of taking money from some people through whichever means, whichever tax policy, and giving money to other people. And in order to evaluate any such form of redistribution, what we have to do really is take a stance on how much do we value an additional dollar or an additional euro, whichever currency, for one person rather than another. So in economics, this is translated in terms of so-called welfare weights. How much do we care about additional income for one person versus another person? But what this question boils down to at the end of the day is that it's a normative question, or moral or philosophical question, if you want. It's not an empirical question that an experiment could possibly answer. Right? The experiment is not going to tell you how much an additional euro for a homeless person versus a millionaire really matters. And relatedly, kind of one of the major motivations, arguably, for basic income and the interest in such policies is that the current welfare states, even where they exist, are imperfect and they have a lot of holes, which manifests in different ways. So certain people are not covered, for instance, because they don't have the right employment history. Certain risks are not insured. Things can happen to you in life which leave you kind of destitute. There are all kinds of conditionalities and all kinds of forms of surveillance that are attached to benefit received, especially in the context of things like unemployment benefits, long-term unemployment benefits, disability benefits, and so on, where there's a lot of kind of control and coercion involved that kind of underpins the possibility of receiving these benefits. But again, like studying these types of holes in the current welfare states or these imperfections in the current system, those are in a way descriptive empirical questions, right? We can ask who is currently not covered, what risks are not insured, and so on. But again, these are not causal questions that would require an experiment. So are there relevant causal questions about basic income? Which means, is there anything we can learn from an experiment, since experiments are there to learn causal effects? And I would argue, yes, at the end of the day, there are, but we have to be clear which these are. And so in particular, I guess what experiments allow us to study is how does people's behavior change when they receive basic income. So for instance, there's often this concern that's being voiced, does everybody stop working when they have a basic income? And kind of relatedly, how is the tax base affected, right? So that's, if everybody stops working, that of course reduces income tax received by the state. And the hope that's often voiced is that people who are safe in the sense that their material existence is guaranteed might become more pro-social, more artistic, more politically or socially involved, more environmentally conscious, and so on, which are all things that potentially have externalities in econ lingo, so that might have positive consequences for other people. And so especially the question about the tax base is at the core of what economists might be interested in here, which allows us to answer how expensive is a basic income really, if we take into account all these behavioral responses, if we take into account the possibility that people might stop working, and so on. And if we combine all these ingredients, so the ones I've mentioned here, so the normative or moral decisions that we have to make, the descriptive questions about the current distribution of benefits and situations of need, and these causal questions of how behavior responds to a policy such as a basic income. Once we combine all these ingredients, then we can answer questions such as what is the optimal basic income scheme? And so that's the perspective I want to push for here. The reason we want to run experiments on basic income or related policies is that we should design these experiments in order to inform policy choice and relatedly to inform the public discourse about policy. And again, just to drive home this point, optimal tax and transfer systems depend on three types of ingredients. They depend on normative decisions, so that's not something an experiment can answer us. They depend on descriptive facts about current society and economy. Again, not something that we need experiments for, but they also depend on causal effects of the policy on behavior. And so what I want to argue then is that we should design experiments in order to learn these causal effects that we need to learn about in as fast a manner as possible. And in order to do that, we really need to combine tools from welfare economics and optimal taxation on the one hand, and from artificial intelligence and active learning on the other hand. So this might maybe come a little bit out of nowhere now, but I will spend the rest of my talk kind of explaining what I mean by that and why I'm excited about the combination of these ideas. And I'm very excited about the possibility of launching a follow-up experiment with my Grundeinkommen, where we actually bring these ideas to the field. Okay, so as I said, like what I want to do now is I want to give you a very quick crash course of optimal taxation, then a very quick crash course of adaptive experiments and active learning. So these are ideas from artificial intelligence, and then describe briefly how we can combine these ideas to design an adaptive experiment to find the optimal basic income. Okay, so what's the basic idea of optimal tax theory in economics? Well, it's often described in terms of a leaky bucket. So to take an example, suppose you consider as a policymaker to raise unemployment benefits, and you do that by raising taxes. And the reason you might want to do that is because you think unemployed people need the money more than those who are net taxpayers now. Poor people need the money more than rich people. But then the counterpoint would be, what if this policy leads people to drop out of the labor market? And so this is kind of the fundamental trade-off here. On the one hand, we think an additional dollar for poor people is worth more than an additional dollar for rich people. But on the other hand, if people respond to such a taxation by reducing the tax base, either through tax evasion or through actually stopping to work, then we might actually need to raise taxes by more than $1 in order to raise benefits by the $1. And so really what optimal taxation then boils down to is equating those two. So this normative choice, how much do we care about different people, against this empirical question of how leaky is the bucket, how many dollars do you lose along the way of redistribution. And one particular type of policy where this might emerge, and this is the type of policy we want to consider in our follow-up experiment, is what's sometimes called negative income taxes. Right? So negative income tax, which many of you might be familiar with, is essentially a form of a basic income. So if you don't have any other earnings or income sources, you get like a guaranteed income, no questions asked. But then as you get richer, you have to start contributing to this basic income program. And in particular, what that means de facto is that the effective transfer you're receiving gets reduced as your pre-tax income increases. And so the type of program we want to implement in our experiment might be something like this picture on the right-hand side. Right, so that the numbers here don't matter. This is just like for illustration. But the basic idea is, in this example, when you have nothing, you receive a transfer of, say, €1,000 per month. But then as you get more and more earnings, that gets reduced until the point where you get no transfer. And since we are not the government, we can't actually tax you. So beyond this point, essentially, you're not affected by the program, except that it provides a form of insurance for you. Should you lose your income in the future, you're guaranteed to be safe. And so two key parameters in such a program are what's the size of the basic income and how quickly do you fade it out? So what's the size of the implicit tax rate? And that's what we would like to find out. What are the optimal magnitudes of these types of parameters? Now, how do we find that out? Well, a key idea here to find out what's the best thing to do is adaptive experimentation, or sometimes this is called multi-armed bandits. And so this is actually at the core of what companies like Google or Facebook do in order to earn the billions, is adaptively learning what kind of content to show you online in order to maximize the revenue from selling ads. But to take a kind of a more socially beneficial example, let's think about how we should experiment in order to learn about unemployment benefits. And now, naively, if you look at data, right, you could compare people who receive government benefits and people who don't receive benefits, such as unemployment insurance, and then you I guess in this example, it's kind of obvious, but then you see people who receive unemployment insurance are more likely to be unemployed. And you might say, oh, that means unemployment insurance causes unemployment. But that's, of course, not the case, because the causality runs the other way. If you're unemployed, you get unemployment benefits. And so this is often summarized as correlation is not causation. And so that's really the reason we need experiments, right? This is the reason we need to randomly, or at least exogenously, assign who gets a benefit or not in order to learn what the effect of the benefit is on behavior. But doing a classic experiment, and that's also what we're doing in our first round experiment that Susann already told you about, is maybe not the best way to go about if you quickly want to learn the best policy. And so here, let me take another example, which would be a clinical trial, right? So suppose you run a hospital and you have patients coming in over time with certain symptoms, and you can choose between different treatments, so maybe different drugs or different surgery methods and so on. And then as the hospital or the doctor, you have to pick the treatment for the next patient. And there's different things you can do. At one extreme, you could just say, I'm going to pick whatever worked best so far. And that's probably the best thing for this current patient. And that's on the face of it is a very sensible thing to do and the ethical thing to do, right? Because you're doing the best possible thing you can for the patient. The problem with that approach is if you only do that, then you never learn about alternatives that might work better. You never learn about new treatments. You never learn if new alternative drugs or methods are safer or better for patient health. And so then the opposite extreme, and that's kind of what is being done mostly in clinical trials now, is to just randomly choose one of the treatments, right? So you just essentially throw a coin for each patient. Either you get the drug or you don't get the drug. And then you observe the outcomes and you use that in order to learn which method is better for patients. But then you're not treating your patients very well. You're doing things that might be bad for them just in order to learn. And as it turns out, if you want to save as many patients as possible over time, what you want to do is somewhere between these two extremes. So you want to trade off, on the one hand, using what you learned in order to help your patients, but on the other hand, continuing to learn in order to make better decisions in the future, which is sometimes in this literature described as an exploration versus exploitation trade-off. So exploration is experimenting in order to learn what's best. Exploitation is using what you learned. And a minimal form of that is also used in clinical trials. Usually, if you run such an experiment and you notice that you kill all your patients, you have to stop the experiment. And if you notice that the new treatment cures all the patients, you also have to stop the experiment. But that's kind of a crude form and not quite the optimal thing to do. Now, we want to take this idea now to this type of idea to a basic income experiment in order to quickly learn what's the best basic income program or the best negative income tax. But this situation is again a bit more complicated, because when you care about welfare, in the sense we think of it in economics or in optimal tax theory, we think of welfare essentially as what you would choose, right? So your welfare is higher in a situation that you would prefer to another situation. But we don't directly observe your welfare utility. However, we can indirectly learn it from your behavior. And so that's something I've been working on the theory side with some theoretical computer scientists and also economists. And turns out this is kind of a slightly more complicated but solvable version of an adaptive experimental problem, where you have to explore a bit more. Is kind of the main difference to like the clinical trial example I just gave you. Bottom line is this is a math problem. We can solve it, and we can say what's the best way to quickly learn the best basic income program to maximize social welfare, given the normative choices that we have to make that go into this. And so that's the plan that we're working on right now, is combining all these ideas and designing an adaptive basic income experiment to maximize social welfare. So the idea we're discussing right now is as follows. There will be an experiment that's going to take place in waves, meaning there's new participants who start every few months, for instance, every 6 months. And in each wave, we try different combinations of negative income tax parameters. So more or less generous basic income, higher or lower tax rate, and so on. Then we observe how people react to that. In particular, do they drop out of the labor market? Do they earn more or less, and so on? and we can take this observed behavior and learn a model of labor supply, which then is an input into the optimal tax models that I briefly described. So these models of the leaky bucket. So essentially, we're learning here how leaky the bucket is, if you want. And based on that, we can calculate a probability that each possible policy is optimal. And that we can then use for the next wave in order to decide how many people are put into different categories of basic income programs. So the basic idea is that over time, you shift more and more participants towards the best possible policy, and you don't want to do this too fast or too slow. If you're too fast, you stop learning too early. If you're too slow, you're not using what you already learned, and again, you're effectively slowing down your overall learning. And so I'm very excited that my Grundeinkommen is interested in implementing such a follow-up experiment with us. And I will stop here, and I'm happy to take questions afterwards and discuss further. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Max, for your fantastic input and this cutting-edge ideas that are you combining now here in our project that's coming up next. And also, this is the end of our presentation. If you have more need for information, please go to our website, basicincomepilot.org. There you will also find a book of more than 100 pages with all background information, interviews with experts, and all of the projects that we are doing. Now, if you have any further questions, please write them into your chat window and we will try to answer. If you don't have any questions, that's also good for us. So we have an earlier lunch break here in Berlin, Germany. And there's one last thing that I'm supposed to say to you after this, as this is one of the last talks of the whole conference. Please note that the General Assembly is beginning at midnight Brisbane time, which is, I think, very soon. So, any questions? By Munli Leong, when you said anyone could have applied, was it still Germans only? Yes. Well, for the raffle that we're doing every month at Mein Grundeinkommen, everyone can apply from all over the world. But for our scientific research project, only people from Germany could apply. This was necessary in order to have the people comparable to each other. Any further questions? Please just write them down. We're here to answer them. When there are no further questions, then I think, Max or Julia, do you have anything left to say?
Yep.
Yeah.
Susann is also there still. Nope.
Thanks so much. I wish you a good time in wherever everybody sits. Have a great day.
Have fun at the General Assembly.
Yes, bye.